Hi, everyone. Welcome tonight to GLN's show with respect to the Chicago teachers' possible strike coming up. What do teachers want? My guest tonight, by the way, my name is Roger Fraser, and I'm with the Gay Liberation Network, and I taught for 34 years as a public school teacher. And I have tonight with me Chris Genovis. And Chris, tell the audience who you are and what relevance you have to this issue about possible strike.
I'm a longtime activist in Chicago, particularly media activist, to help get the word out about progressive causes. I've also, for the last 2 years, been serving as the communications director of the Chicago Teachers Union. So if people haven't been seeing me shooting on the streets as much in the last couple of years, it's because it's hectic. It's hectic.
Okay, well, welcome today.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Before we get into our show tonight, there's a really important announcement, and there's a relevance to this announcement. Forever wars have been going on for forever, basically, and these wars are draining resources from not just our schools, but from affordable housing and medical care and so on. At 6 p.m. Wednesday, October 9th, we're going to have a discussion with Cindy Sheehan and Vincent Emanuel. Cindy is a longtime anti-war activist, and it's going to be on stopping forever wars, and we welcome all of you to be there. As I say, there's a close connection between school funding and the enormous resources that go to the military in this country. Okay, well, let's get into it. Is there, Chris, going to be a strike in October?
Well, that's really for our rank and file members to decide. We're a democratically run union. We're very proud of that. So members will be voting on September 24th through 26th in our schools to decide if what we've been offered at the table by CPS and the mayor is in fact adequate to meet the needs of our students. I have to tell you that to date, it's as if we live in two parallel universes. You've got the mayor on the one hand parroting much of what she said as a candidate, and we feel very strongly that if we were bargaining with candidate Lightfoot, we'd have a strong contract in place that really supports student needs, improves working conditions. Our working conditions as educators are our students' learning conditions. CPS is by its own admission $1 billion plus a year better off than it was just in 2016 alone. They have the money to make a truly transformational impact on learning conditions in the schools, on getting students the supports and educational resources they need. Unfortunately, at the bargaining table, we're dealing with the team headed up by the same corporate anti-labor lawyer, Jim Franzik, who was the hatchet man for Rahm Emanuel, and before that, who was the hatchet man at the table for Richie Daley. A guy who wrote the legislation that singled out Chicago teachers alone to rob us of our rights to bargain on critical issues like class size and classroom resources. All we have been getting really at the table to date is pretty much an effort to claw back the rights that we already have and shortchange our classrooms and our school communities. And that's just not good enough.
Got it. With respect to Lightfoot, Jesse Sharkey, who's the head of the CTU, the Teachers Union, has gone on record as saying that candidate Lightfoot is a very different person from Mayor Lightfoot, in the sense that she's made promises as a candidate which she's unwilling to back up with actual contractual language. How important is getting the right contractual language into the contract, whereas instead of, say, just having general sentiments expressed in the contract?
Well, we are the only school district denied the most basic form of democracy in this state. Out of more than 800 local school districts. Chicago's is the only one that is singled out to forbid the people of the city from actually electing an accountable school board. So the only mechanism for real accountability in terms of educational standards and educational resources that we have access to that's actually enforceable is our contract. Unfortunately, one of the first moves that the mayor made after she was sworn in, and I'm sure those machinations were going on before she actually formally took office, was to sandbag legislation in Springfield that had overwhelmingly passed the House that would have restored our bargaining rights and made it possible for us to actually elect our own school board in the city of Chicago. We have no mechanism for accountability in the city short of the contract. And we're not the only labor union that's bargaining with CPS right now. Members of SEIU Local 73 who are, the hundreds and hundreds of paraprofessionals who help students with disabilities, special needs students, some of the school security guards, the folks who drive our buses that take our kids to and from school, as well as workers in other city agencies like the Park District are also bargaining a new contract, specifically for those CPS workers with CPS. And those people, as with our paraprofessionals, really make poverty wages. So we're really looking to bake into our contract the very promises that won Ms. Lightfoot her election as mayor. She ran on a progressive agenda. I can't tell you the number of times I've read her 15-point program for public education in the city that promised a librarian and a school nurse in every school, that promised real equity and educational justice for our students, something that they have been denied for 8 years under Rahm Emanuel's, endless budgets of austerity, his deep cuts to individual schools for funding for not just educators, but classroom resources, extracurricular programming, student supports like social workers. I mean, we've lived through 8 years of enormous hardship in our schools, and it's really time. And I believe that the voters thought that what they were voting for in April was a truly transformational administration that was finally going to bring some equity to our schools after 8 years of austerity and abuse. Unfortunately, we've seen the opposite at the bargaining table. We have a caller, and by the way, down at the bottom of your screen, you'll see the number. If you'd like to call in, we're willing and able to take calls.
Good evening.
Let's go ahead with the caller.
I just want to make this one point. And it seems like the city don't want to open up their books and let the people see what is there. Now, on the news last week, or maybe before, the mayor went out and said that the city is $800 million in the hole, but yet $1.3 billion going to be given to a developer in terms of TIP fund. And that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And when we look at the history of CPS, they built these new schools, and I'd be wondering a lot of times why they just can't maintain them and rehab them, and they take our tax money, and it doesn't make any sense. You look at some of these, some of the other schools that have the old buildings, but they're well kept and maintained, and it seems like certain buildings they fall apart, and then we have schools where when it rains, water coming on heads of the children, not inadequate lighting, inadequate heating, and they can't get clean water, just to mention a few problems, but yet they can give $1.3 billion to a developer without tax money in terms of TIP funds.
Thank you. This is a great question. Do you want to respond to that?
That's a great question, and I think it also really gives the opportunity to address some of the confusion that the fifth floor and CPS itself has generated about both what we're fighting for our neighborhood public schools versus the financial challenges that the city is confronting in the wake of 8 years of mismanagement under Rahm Emanuel. People need to understand the budgets for CPS and the city are completely separate. Separate funding streams, separate tax levies. We get our bucket of public funds on the CPS side, and the city gets its bucket of funds on the City of Chicago side. And that's really important because one of the things that the CTU has been doing over the course of the last 8 years is fighting for more funding specifically to go into our neighborhood public schools. So one of the reasons CPS, we believe, and we've documented this very clearly publicly, has the money to truly improve learning conditions and working conditions in our schools is because we've been able to win over $1 billion a year that goes directly to CPS. It doesn't go to the fifth floor. It doesn't go to city agencies. It goes to our schools and the people who run them. That's funding that came in the wake of state legislation to reform the school funding formula that was passed in August of 2017. It comes from an independent pension levy. So CPS is now getting between $300 and $500 million a year to offset the cost of the pension payments that it owes to its workers' pension funds because it took pension holidays for years. Over $1 billion a year for CPS coffers. Now, in terms of the TIP funds, these handouts to these rich, politically connected, clouded developers, it's a disgrace. TIFs were originally designed to put money literally on the table in blighted low-income communities. Instead, we've got things like a South Street tax. Now, the last time I checked, the center of the beating heart of the financial industry in the city was not a blighted community. We are not just spending money on Lincoln Yards, $1.3 billion conservatively in public dollars to a private developer who will reap hundreds of millions of dollars conservatively in profit, but we're also giving money to other projects like the 78. These kinds of projects don't build neighborhoods for the rest of us. They build brand new neighborhoods for new rich people. They profit rich people, and it comes at the expense of public dollars, which are always in short supply, which ought to be good at going to the public good. In terms of how CPS itself allocates the resources that it has, one of the reasons CPS is carrying a substantial debt load right now is because Rahm Emanuel and Richie Daley before him went on a building spree, including of charter schools run by private operators who profit directly from the running of those schools, who lowball wages for their workers, who pack kids into those classrooms like sardines, who underfund classroom needs. And that's a pattern that we've seen in neighborhood public schools as well. I have to tell you, it's a funding practice that has marred the district, the school district, for decades. And it has created what is essentially a separate and unequal public school district, where we know that schools on the south side and the west side are routinely shortchanged for the building repairs that they need. We have literally $2 billion of pent-up repairs for schools, neighborhood public schools on the south sides and the west sides. These aren't just public buildings. These are neighborhood anchors, sometimes in neighborhoods where they're the last investments of civic goodwill standing in black and brown neighborhoods that have historically been shortchanged, historically been discriminated, historically been hammered by a racist policy of anti-development. And now we're starting to see some action percolate in places like Englewood. But is it the people of Englewood who toughed it out through the hard times when that neighborhood was being starved of resources who are benefiting? It is not. It's the fat cat real estate players who will come in, swoop up properties for cheap, flip them, and take the profits for them. And it dovetails with the policy that we've seen on the city side that has essentially pushed out over 200,000 working class black people, black families, their children, from the city. These are neighborhoods that got no relief from the city, that the city did nothing to provide support for in the wake of the 2007-2008 economic collapse. These are neighborhoods whose residents, current and former, have lost literally hundreds of millions of dollars in the only equity they had in those neighborhoods, the homes in which they put their funds. And they are still getting short shrift from CPS and on the city side.
Yeah.
And I'll give you an example. We know in the last budget that CPS passed that they cut funding to over 200 schools by at least $100,000 a school. At a school like Juarez on Cermak Road, where enrollment is growing rather than shrinking, where we've got over 1,700 kids in that classroom, CPS cut the budget to Juarez by $840,000. In Englewood, CPS moved to shut down 4 high schools that it had literally starved of resources and siphoned students away from for 15 years. That's an attack on the black community in the city that has always been an anchor and a vital force in our city. It's an attack on Latinx families who are feeling the pressures from gentrification, dovetailing with lack of investment in their neighborhoods. It's a policy that serves the few at the expense of the many. Yeah. What we're trying to bring to the table instead in our bargaining with CPS is a commitment to bargain for the common good, a commitment to bargain to get the needs of our students met, a commitment to bargain to ensure that teachers have what they need to teach, that support staff have what they need to provide the support that our students need. And instead, what we're getting at the bargaining table is a push-off, in the back of the hand.
One of the things that Lightfoot has maintained is that that staffing, although there's real need for increased staffing, there's not enough qualified. She claims there's not enough qualified people to man these various positions. What she doesn't mention is that the pay, for example, to teaching assistants and school clerks is so low that their children actually qualify for either full or reduced school lunch programs according to federal guidelines. So this is a bogus red herring she's really drawing across the path. The fact of the matter is that there's less librarians today by far in schools compared to 2012, even the strike year. And the same goes for school nurses. There's 108 school nurses. Check this picture, Chris. Our working conditions are our students' learning conditions. 108 school nurses to cover 400,000 students? I mean, this is outrageous. It's disgusting. And it needs to change.
I will tell you, it is a civil rights issue. In this city, the overwhelming majority of our students come from working class and low-income families. The overwhelming majority of our students are African American and Latinx. When that entire constituency is being mistreated and abused, and that includes the black workers who serve those kids. Those school clerks and those teaching assistants are often as not black women who are the financial anchors of their families, who live in the neighborhoods in which they work, who have long-standing, sometimes multi-generational commitments to those very neighborhoods. When you mistreat a worker like that who puts in 8 hours and sometimes 10 hours a day at her school, serving her parents, serving her students, and you can't pay her even $28,000, $29,000 a year, that's an atrocity. When you have hundreds of thousands of general education kids who confront trauma and poverty and the other hardships that are caused by racism and segregation and literally decades of neglect from our city fathers, and you can't get the resources to those kids that they need just to start out on a level playing field, that is a civil rights issue. And if the mayor does not step up to the plate and make real the commitment to equity, the commitment to educational justice that she made to those kids, teachers are going to think twice about showing up one day at work and instead denying the district their labor until they force the district to do better by their students and by the communities that are anchored by those schools.
Chris, there's I've heard from some friends working in the system that say that it would be a great idea to get Lightfoot actually negotiating instead of dealing with Mr. Francic, as you say, who has a long and not very reputable reputation going back. Why not get Lightfoot there negotiating at the table? What do you think about that idea?
Well, this week, for the first time, the mayor and our union president, Jesse Sharkey, actually met for the first time and actually had a discussion about where we're at in bargaining. I have to tell you, it's a little bit difficult to know. I'm not a mind reader, so it's somewhat hard to tell whether or not she's even clearly apprised of what her own bargaining team is up to. Because it's as if literally we're talking in two different universes, But she also said, and we made sure that, our members knew about this. She also said that she doesn't submit to public pressure. I don't know if that's the mark of someone who's naive and new to public service, or if that's just a reflection of ideologically where she comes from. That was certainly the attitude that she took when she was running the police board for Richard Daley. It's certainly the attitude that she took when she was working for the city as a high-powered corporate lawyer to try to beat back civilians' claims on some truly horrific police abuse cases. Mm-hmm. I don't know if she's just, not getting the straight scoop from the people that she's got, running the table for her. But this job is all about accountability to the public. People elected her because they were tired of a lack of accountability to the public. People elected her to do better. And we're not alone in terms of groups of individuals who were promised one thing and are finding that, once the office is won, they're getting an earful of the opposite from the fifth floor. She agreed to provide the folks organizing, the community residents organizing around the Obama Library. She assured them that they would be provided with the community benefits agreement that would help protect people from being pushed out by gentrification in the neighborhood, in that overwhelmingly black working class neighborhood. Now she's changed her tune. Yeah. She assured that there would be hard police accountability standards put in place, and indicated her willingness to actually listen to and embrace the proposals of police accountability activists. Now she's talking another tune and basically said, forget it, that's not going anywhere. She raised concerns about investing $95 million in a brand new cop academy on the West Side that nobody that I've talked to on the West Side, nobody that's been polled in the West Side actually wants, given the tensions between the police and the civilians that they routinely mistreat. Now she's saying we might have to spend more than $95 million, maybe much more than $95 million on that cop academy. We are hardly alone in groups that heard one thing when we were asked to vote and are hearing another thing now that the rubber meets the road.
Oh, so we have the immigrant rights activists too, angry that that she's not closing loopholes. Another language issue about making people accountable for violations, say, of the welcoming city ordinances. The failure to mete out penalties to officials who violate those ordinances is absolutely key. And her failure to press on that is just another example of why getting contractual language there with suitable accountability for administrators and others is, as you say, is absolutely key. One issue, the CTU was a big, the teachers union was a skinned about criticism and maybe loyalty. Is this going to have an effect on the bargaining with the union?
So, There's no question that it's been the sentiment of some in the union, just as it's been the sentiment amongst a lot of political reporters that I talk to in the course of my work, that she's brittle, and some think she's vindictive. I don't think that the rank and file members of the Chicago Teachers Union are alone in experiencing that, though. I think particularly when you look at the issue of immigrant rights and the promise to close the carve-outs, that you could drive a Mack truck through in the welcoming ordinance that Rahm is so proud about talking about, when really it does very little to protect literally close to 50% of the people in this city who are Latinx and or immigrants or have family members who are immigrants who are at risk from this, xenophobic, racist, set of policies that are coming from Washington, D.C. I almost feel like we don't take it personally because we're so not alone in, frankly, being disappointed by what the candidate promised on the one hand and what the mayor is not offering on the other. Mm-hmm. The question is, can the mayor be moved to do better as we approach the potential for not just a strike authorization vote, but after that, an actual strike date?
Do you think you'll have this? Do you think you'll have the? Oh, by the way, this is the Chicago Teachers Union logo. Mm-hmm. And here's some. And by the way, if anyone wanting to get in touch with CTU, that's what you should do online. CTUlocal1.org, and check us out on Twitter. We're at CTUlocal1. Got a take or got an observation or got a concern about your kid's school, drop us a line there. Drop us a line on our Facebook page. We're pretty easy to find. We're always eager to see what people have to say about their take on conditions in their local schools, and we're eager to share that out with the larger public. We've got literally tens of thousands of followers in a social media space like Twitter. It's not just what I think as a communications person at the union. What's really, really critical is what our rank and file is confronting on the ground, what our students are confronting in their schools, and what parents are struggling with and need to see improved. Well, thank you so much, Chris. This has been extremely interesting and informative. I want to remind folks again, Stopping Forever War is a discussion with Cindy Sheehan and Vince Emanuel. Check out those names going by on your screen. Each one of them involves U.S. military, either occupation or aggression. And if you don't think that that has an effect on the funding of schools across this nation, think again, because it really does.
That was fun.